he played 7 hours of Dragon Age, and there's a lot of people who've made videos like this. Like I think what's his name, Maddie. I think he's been through it. Not he isn't like him, but there's been a few people who've made videos because if you're a certain level of content creator, you get invited to like go fly out and try certain things, where you get sent like a demo to go try something out, or you get like a dev key to try something out. But I wanted to click on Luke's video in particular out of everybody else's because Luke tends to have a fair approach, and that's whether I agree with him or disagree with him. He tends to have fair approach. So basically, I feel like watching this, we'll get an idea from someone who's usually fair on how the game's playing, how the game's looking, versus say like someone like Aswin Go, who's a grifter. So like if Aswin didn't get invited to play this fucking game, why would he? But he is someone who has a habit of like talking bad about Dragon Age in this game in particular. And I don't think he actually thinks the game's bad. I think he's like I say, he's a grifter. So he's on this grift about Dragon Age because he knows his audience is a bunch of freaking like anti-woke incels, and they're feasting on his bad takes about Dragon Age. Anyways, Luke Stevens' video. He plays 7 hours of Dragon Age. Let's hear what he has to say about it. Hopefully, his things are positive.
The Veilguard. This is a game I have been keeping a very close eye on, as have many other people, because it represents an extremely high-stakes release for one of the industry's most prolific developers, BioWare. Dragon Age, of course, is the franchise which last had a release in 2014 with Dragon Age Inquisition. That year, it actually won Game of the Year at the very first Game Awards that Jeff Keighley threw. But
that's such a very forgotten thing. People spoke about BioWare, how BioWare has had L after L after L because of Anthem and because of Andromeda. People forget that Inquisition was Game of the Year by not just like one publication, but by a lot of publications. Dragon Age Inquisition was the Game of the Year. People thought like BioWare has just been on a downward spiral. It's like, when was let me check. Mass Effect Andromeda release date was 2017. Anthem's release was 2019. So Inquisition came out in 2014. So those two being the two most recent ones, Anthem and Andromeda. People feel like BioWare has taken a step back. The thing about Anthem was it actually had a very, very good premise, a very good idea. BioWare is not why Anthem failed. Anthem failed because EA did what EA does best, and that's put their freaking their dumb 2 cents and nose into something they don't need to put it into. Anthem was an idea by BioWare, to make a very, very cool, interesting game. EA wanted the game to compete with Destiny, so they forced BioWare to make a game that was a Destiny competitor, and that led to the game that we got. When it comes to Andromeda just is one of those games that had a very, very bad launch because it was filled with like a shit ton of bugs, and then it's also a casualty of the anti-woke mob, and as well as a casualty of people who are nostalgic and don't want to move on. What I mean by the latter of that, I think I said to my review of Andromeda, where there's a lot of people who hated the game, not because the game was bad, but because they don't want to play as a new character. They want to play as Shepard. That's what they want. They want Shepard. They want the Normandy crew. They don't want a new crew. They don't want, even because a lot of people actually freaking liked, I forgot his name. Was it Drax? Well, it wasn't Drax. I forgot his freaking name. But like the Krogan from Andromeda. A lot of people freaking actually liked him, but for other people, they were like, no, he's a replacement for Rex. I don't want to replace Rex. I want Rex. They view Vetra. It's Vetra. It's been a while since I played Andromeda. But they viewed her as a replacement to Garrus. They don't want her. They want Garrus. They viewed everyone as a replacement for the Normandy crew instead of just playing it as something just as new. So if you had that open-minded lens of it's okay to have a new team, it's okay to have a new main character, then you are more likely to enjoy the game from that standpoint. But now when it comes to like the next Mass Effect game, they're clearly going backwards to the point of, all right, we're going to give you the Normandy crew. You might play a Shepard, you might not play a Shepard. Who knows? There's nothing known about when it comes to Shepard when it comes to the next game, other than the fact that we know that it's going to involve Liara and probably the majority of the original freaking like characters. But when it comes to Inquisition, It's also important to remember this too. The team who does Dragon Age is not the same team who does Mass Effect. Developers have multiple teams, and multiple teams work on different things. So they're not the same team. So you will see different quality of games being created in BioWare because there's a whole different team making Dragon Age games versus making Mass Effect games. So the Dragon Age portion of BioWare have pretty much always done well, with the exception of, Dragon Age 2 might be, more of a 50-50 when it comes to how the community reacted to it, because Dragon Age 2, though I myself and some other people really enjoyed Dragon Age 2, but there's also a lot of people who thought it was like a rushed game, which it was. I think it had like a 12-month freaking like development cycle. It didn't really have like a lot of expansive world building. You pretty much just stayed on Kirkwall majority of the game. A lot of the dungeons were reskins, so people had valid reasons why they didn't enjoy Dragon Age 2. But it was mostly a good game, and then Inquisition again won the game of the year.
Since then, Dragon Age has been on ice, while BioWare went off and made Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem, and we all know how those games ended up at the end of the day, and it left a lot of people really worried whether or not BioWare was capable of putting out really compelling and interesting RPGs with good roleplay and narrative consequence and fun adventure. Confidence was shaken, to say the very, very least. And that's led a lot of people to look at Dragon Age the Veilguard skeptically, withholding judgment and excitement until they are shown a reason to be excited. And in this video, I'm going to be explaining to you my thoughts on the game after playing it for 7 hours at a preview event in early September. I have a lot of strong thoughts, and we're gonna go through all of it, and I will say that they have given us pretty strict guidelines to avoid spoilers, but they have allowed us to show a lot of the game. So I will be doing that and adhering to very strict guidelines. So if there's some footage you think
there's gonna be someone like Asmon, again, Drifter, who's going to take him saying there's strict guidelines as him saying he can't be negative towards the game. You know what's going to happen. Lou Stevens, like I said before, he tends to be a very fair person. So, and he's also he's just pretty honest about being told you can't be negative about the game. I don't think he's going to be positive towards the game because he has to be positive towards the game. I think he's going to give you his honest opinion. I don't think BioWare told him, hey, in order for you to make a video about this game, you got to be positive. But again, I'm saying right now, there's only people who are going to be like, oh, he's only positive because he has to. He said there's guidelines, and those guidelines are forcing him to be positive. He's telling you that the guidelines are mostly about spoilers.
Being that you're like, oh, why don't you just show me? If I'm not showing it, it's probably because they asked me not to. Just
serving the Low Country for 35 years, right from the heart of Charleston, Baker Buick GM.
So you know. But if you're looking for the spark notes of my impressions and opinions of Dragon Age the Veilguard after playing it for basically an entire day, I will tell you that I am thoroughly impressed. What I played was incredibly polished, graphically stunning, fairly narratively complex, and above—
That's funny. So I made a video. It was a reaction video to an IGN video, and someone had commented, "This game looks like it's 5 years old." Luke is like, the game looks graphically astonishing. So like, again, you have to think about this. What is someone's view of graphics? Like, what are they looking for? Are they looking for detail? Are they looking for it to be 8K? Like, what are you looking for graphics? For someone to say it's astonishing, someone else to go, it looks like it's outdated. It's like, again, that could be someone who has no idea what the fuck they're talking about and just being negative because, again, there's people on the internet who are just negative because they're edgy. They think they make them look cool, and they want to be a contrarian. They want to be against whatever someone else is saying.
Above all, entertaining. Just a few weeks ago, I made a video called A Skeptical Look at Dragon Age the Veilguard, where I outlined many of my concerns and frustrations, like the first trailer that they dropped, such as the troubled recent releases that BioWare has had, EA's track record with things. I went through it all, and I have not been that gentle towards Anthem or Andromeda or BioWare or EA in general. And despite that, they still were willing to let me try the game because they were so confident in what they had here. And after playing it,
which is a good thing, you know. He's someone, like I said, he was someone who's critical of Anthem and Andromeda, and they still invited him to try it out. That's a company who, you know, isn't going to blacklist you just because you were negative. A lot of companies will. A lot of companies will freaking blacklist you because, you know, you were saying negative things, and they just don't even want to bother with you because you're such a negative person. As I always said, Luke is a very fair person. You might not agree with him, you might do agree with him, but he's a fair person. And I think studios know that. They're like, okay, we can, if he was being, you know, critical of this game, it's because there's actual validity to his criticisms, and we can trust him to be honest with the audience. Because again, when it comes to content creation, this is advertisement. Everything you see on YouTube when it comes to gaming is advertisement. A Twitch stream, a video YouTube, a YouTube stream, a Facebook stream, whatever, is advertisement. Is for that studio. They want to be able to give someone with his audience a chance to see the game and hear about the game from someone who the audience is going to like trust, because they view him as being someone who's fair.
See why they are so confident. I don't think everybody will fall in love with this, but I do think Dragon Age fans and people who like fantastical adventure roleplay games, they are in for a real treat if the entire game is like what I played. And in this video, I'm going to break down why with more details, lots of gameplay footage, all of the nitty-gritty goodness. So without further ado, let's get into it. Just make sure to like the video if you enjoy it, and subscribe for more videos and stuff, because that'd be cool. But with all that said, let's just get right into it. As I said, we played about 7 hours of the game over the course of a single day. We were brought to a big campus that EA operates within in San Francisco, California. They had taken a large open room that they use for events like these and converted it into a sort of Dragon Age playroom with tons of computers set up. The version of the game we played was on PC. I'm not exactly sure what the build was, but I believe it was running on a 4080 and everything was cranked. So what you're seeing most likely represents a very, very beautiful and maxed out version of the game. They had 5 missions for us to play through, 3 of which we were allowed to record, and the other 2 we were of course allowed to play and take notes on, though they asked that we not share too much about them since they involve heavy spoilers. And starting at about 10:30 a.m. they just let us go, and if we wanted to play straight through lunch, we could do that. If we wanted to play into the evening, we could do that, so long time of 6 p.m. And that's pretty much what I did. I played a lot. I even replayed missions I had already done, making different choices to see how it would change the outcome in the next mission that directly followed it. And it allowed me to really poke and prod and see how differently you could handle certain conversations or certain narrative beats or choices that seemingly have differing consequences. And it's once again a perfect example of why for these types of games, when you're trying to prove that you have something, giving people time to actually test it is crucial, because I found some interesting stuff that I'll talk about in just a few minutes. Spoiler alert, your choices like really matter. Like a lot. The first thing we got to do is go through the prologue. This was roughly an hour and a half and included some of the footage that's already been released publicly. This time though, we could go through the entire character creator ourselves, design our appearance, select our class, faction, playstyle, lineage, everything. Perhaps one of the most interesting bits about this was selecting your backstory. This actually does have a pretty significant impact on dialogue with characters and NPCs while you're going through the rest of the game, especially in later missions, later in Act 1.
Backstory.
You see, what we...
Sorry, just like I said before, they kind of abandoned, you know, the original style of character creation at the Dragon Age 1, where your backstory mattered a lot, because, you know, Dragon Age 2, Honk is Honk. There's not a lot of things that can happen when it comes to, like, creating your backstory. And if any kind of comes to the Inquisitor, like you don't really have the ability to create an extensive backstory like you could in Dragon Age 1, where like you can be a Dalish elf who's from a camp, or a Dalish elf who's from the city, or you can be a noble or a circle mage or whatever, things like that. They kind of went away from that. So again, it's a big thing in my opinion to see that they're going back to, you know, making it matter to have backstory.
We were allowed to play was basically the prologue, a select few missions in the middle of Act 1, and then a big moment in the middle of Act 1, and then the finale of Act 1, or at least half of it, basically. They ended on a cliffhanger just to keep us hooked, but I have a pretty good idea of how Act 1 ends. That being said, there is a lot of game here, and I was pretty impressed at how varied it felt while playing through it. Just a selection of Act 1 seemed like there were many, many differing levels and art styles and quest lines in terms of tone. Some of them were very lighthearted and just sort of I don't know what else to call it other than pop culture fantasy, but then other segments of the game were extremely dark and kind of disturbing. It was extremely varied, which is something I was hoping for. In case you don't recall, the trailer that they dropped in early June of this year was not received super great. Most people felt that it was tonally just off. It didn't feel like Dragon Age. It felt like your standard appealing to modern audiences type game where they're trying desperately to be witty and funny with characters that don't take things seriously. It just was tonally.
I mean, that's Dragon Age. I feel like people just don't remember how Dragon Age plays or how Dragon Age tells its stories, because that is Dragon Age. Dragon Age has always had characters who are witty, and like, go back to Origins. Alistair is an unserious, witty character. Morgan is also kind of unserious and witty. Like the only serious characters in Dragon Age Origins was like when she's like the grandma of the group. Sten, he's a Canary. They tend to not freaking be very witty or, you know, unserious. They're very, very serious group of people. In Dragon Age 2, Isabella is very, very unserious and always cracking jokes and, you know, things like that. Varric is very, very unserious and again very witty. So it's not like it's something that's like out of character for Dragon Age to have witty characters who are unserious. Again, I feel like a lot of people who have like those kind of takes haven't played the other 3 games in so long they don't remember those games being what they are. They probably have a memory of Alistair, Morgan, and everyone being very, very like. Remember Anders in Dragon Age 1, not 2. 1, he's in a DLC called The Awakening. He is so unserious. Like, he is so unserious and all about just being a complete jokester. And then, you know, he's a little more serious in Dragon Age 2 because he's like imbued. He's fused with Justice, who's a spirit that you also has as a remember in the Awakening DLC. So he's more serious because of Justice. But when it comes to Anders being Anders, he's still kind of like that unserious person. So I don't know. I feel like when it comes to like this part of the video and this particular topic of this trailer not being serious and trying too hard to be, you know, witty and modern, that's what the original game was to begin with. You know, there hasn't been a Dragon Age game that was like where all the characters are just these ultra serious people. There are some characters who are ultra serious, and ironically, those characters tend to be the most unliked. For example, Aveline in Dragon Age 2 is very, very serious. And back then, people now might enjoy her, but back then when the game first came out, people were not big Aveline fans because they prefer Isabella, and they viewed her as like basically like the anti Isabella because she had like a lot of negative things to say about her. And then Dragon Age Inquisition, what's her name? Vivian. She was very, very serious. Like, very, very serious. And not only that, she was also pro-circle. For those who don't know the story of Dragon Age, the circle is where all the mages are. And part of why the conflict has erupted in the game, this is a very political game. This game's all about politics, racism, things like that. And that includes, you know, basically a civil war breaking out because of mages, because of a mage Templar war essentially. But it's basically a civil war. So like that's the kind of like a lot of the politics of Dragon Age, and Vivian was pretty much very pro a lot of things people who play the game wouldn't be pro of, because a lot of people play the games are way more, you know, open-minded and way more let them just do what they want to do, let them be free and things like that. Vivian was very hard-nosed. She was an asshole. She was very serious, and she was a pro circle mage. A lot of people did not like her.
Off. And it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and I think set strange expectations where people were worried this was going to be yet another one of those games. But something interesting happened when I was at the event, and maybe like I shouldn't say this, but I think it's interesting, so I'm going to say it anyways. And that is that I spoke to a number of people that, I'll keep it vague, are involved in Dragon Age the Veilguard to one degree or another, whether they're involved with the marketing or the development, what have you. And one thing I heard from pretty much everybody that I spoke to was that they didn't like that trailer either. They didn't want that trailer to go up and be the first look at Dragon Age the Veilguard. It seems as though internally the people actually making the game felt as though that was not representative of what the game was. It was potentially, I mean, my inference was that it was somebody higher up within EA or EA's marketing team that made that choice to frame the trailer.
Remember how I said earlier in this video that EA has a tendency of putting their nose in their business, their unneeded freaking opinions into things they don't need to put it into, and a lot of what EA does has caused a lot of, you know, why some games have failed. Sitting here again, the trailer. He's saying the first trailer that they showed. I don't think the trailer they showed was like bad. I think it just wasn't. Here's what I'll say about that trailer, where I can see his standpoint and other standpoints. It would have been a fine trailer if it was like released today. But for your first trailer, people don't want to see that. They want to see, you know, the world building. They want to see, you know, what's going on with the Mage Templar War, what's going on with Solus. They want to see this serious stuff. They don't want to see a character breakdown where it looks very, you know, lighthearted, because the world right now, by the world I mean Dragon Age, not like our world. The world in Dragon Age right now is not very positive, you know. So you have this positive character teaser trailer as your first trailer when everyone who plays the game is fully aware of what's going on in the world. So they're like, we want to see that. We want to see the darkness of Dragon Age right now. We don't want to see this lighthearted Marvel-like character trailer
that way and try to sell the game in that style. And the people working on the game weren't happy about it, but their hands were kind of tied. They didn't get to make that choice. And since then, they've been trying to dig themselves out of that hole. But for me, it was reassuring to hear that the team that made the game was not thrilled with that trailer either. They felt that it wasn't indicative of what's actually here. And I can attest to this. What we played had some lighthearted moments, sure, and some of the characters and companions I found more likable than others, but there were also segments that were quite dark, areas and towns that were taken over by the Blighted, or where a dragon might have attacked and wreaked havoc. Like, it was not all glitz and glamour and lighthearted silliness. There was some intense stuff here as well, and I think that this is much more indicative of what the whole game will be, not just that like kitschy campy trailer that we got in early June. And for me, that's really encouraging, because I personally didn't like that trailer, and I don't know of anybody else who did, but nonetheless, I guess just make of that what you will. Now, one of the other things that was sort of the elephant in the room for a lot of us that were playing was how linear the game was going to end up being. What we saw, of course, in the previous gameplay demo was the prologue section, the very first 45 minutes roughly of the game, and that was very linear, as you would expect. Most games have very linear openings to show you the ropes and explain how things work, and as a result, it can often lead to situations where people feel underwhelmed if that's their first impression. However, what I will say is that the sections that we got to play later on in the game were much more varied, though I think I need to explain a little bit more about how the game is laid out. Now, the way I would describe
I've been saying
the level design,
ever since we saw like the IGN stuff, that I feel like this game's gonna be more of an open linear game, you know, open world fused with linear. More so in the sense that it's going to be open to some extent, but downsized. It won't be like some massive bloat fest like a lot of modern RPGs have become. A lot of modern RPGs are very bloated, because a lot of people don't freaking know how to make an open world game. So they just feel like, all right, the world's open. There's a bunch of useless side content you can go do. Have fun for 300 hours. It's like, yeah, that's not fun. Looking at you, Valhalla. So but BioWare probably notices like, all right, we kind of need to you know, downsize. The comparison that I had on a previous video was Mass Effect 2 in comparison to Mass Effect 1. Mass Effect 1 was very open, had a very extensive, you know, weapon tree and all these different like armor types and things like that. Then 2 was way more, you know, linear and streamlined with how a lot of the things worked. Like you didn't have as many, you know, skill trees. You didn't do as much exploring. Yeah, you had the tedious, you know, planetary scan, but that was pretty much like, you know, it when it came to like dribble content. We'll call it dribble content. But it was like I said, it was way more linear than Mass Effect 1. I kind of see the same thing here, where it's like it's going to be open to an extent, but it's more downsized when it comes to this world than Inquisition. Kind of like how I see it. Like, is it an open linear situation?
In Dragon Age the Veilguard, at least the stuff that I tried, is roughly similar to like God of War 2018, where quest lines or the main story will take you to a certain spot and you'll go through a largely linear path while completing that quest and going through that area. You can return to that area. There's other secrets to be found and goodies to be
I can
found.
actually see that because they showed the veil mirrors, because there's like multiple Olivians that you use to get to locations. You look at that when it comes to God of War, because for those who didn't play 2018 God of War, there's like this, I forgot what it was called, it's been a while since I played it. There's like this structure that you go to, and Kratos will spend the thing to turn these portals into whatever world it's going to go to. So like, okay, we're going to go to Helheim. Let's do this thing so we can go to, so we can make this, go to Helheim. So it's like that. If you play the game, I'm sure you understand what I'm saying.
Side quests there and stuff like that, but it's not just totally open world at the end of the day. Like it's more linear open as opposed to just wide open, if that makes sense. It's hard to explain, but fundamentally what they're trying to do here is to give you more handcrafted areas that have more intentionality behind them, rather than just a big open world that was mostly procedurally generated and that you can run around and find randomly placed stuff that
That's a Starfield comment.
Spawns about. Because really at the end of the day, what they wanted to do was to give you levels that were interesting, that were memorable, and to be able to craft encounters within those levels that are impacted by your choices and your decisions and your build. And honestly, this is just kind of hard to explain. It's something when you play it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I see what you're doing. And it's really not that big of a deal. I've heard some people complain that they haven't gone full open world or anything. But in this case, having played the game, I actually think this works better given what they're trying to.
Yeah, I don't think Dragon Age needs to be a massive open world. It never was. Like even when it came to the first game, like it was very open, but you still kind of travel the same way in Origins that you traveled in say like Dragon Age 2, where you just, a screen pops up and you go from Kirkwall to a Dalish camp. Same thing in Origins, where you would go from Denerim to the what you call it, the keep, or go to Lorthal. Now there were like moments of Origins where while you're traveling, you can be invaded, air quotes, by highwaymen, bandits, or be like design moments where you be interrupted on your way to where you're going to, and now you gotta freaking do, like, you gotta watch a cutscene, or you gotta freaking do a quick little comment section and then continue your journey to wherever you're going. I say this again, not every game doesn't need to be a massive open world. Some games fit better being open linear, and that's okay. Like Dragon Age is fine being an open linear game. It doesn't have to be insanely open. Like, it just doesn't have to be. I feel like people who want it to be insanely open are people who don't actually play Dragon Age, and they have this brain where they just want every game to be open world, especially when it comes to a game that's like that's dark fantasy. They want every game to feel like Skyrim. They want every game to be this massive open world where you just do all these other things. It's like sometimes it's better for games to be a little more downsized
to do here than if they just went Inquisition all over again and just went for quantity instead of quality. But don't get it twisted, this game is not small at all. It seems massive by all accounts. I've tried to get a clear answer out of them as to how big it actually is, and nobody was willing to just outright say, we expect it to take you 80 hours or 150 hours or 40 hours. Nobody was willing to just say how big it was. All they would tell me was that it was 3 acts, and each of the acts are pretty large, and what we played were very small selections of Act 1, which would just be a third, and it took us like 7 hours, 6 hours ish to get through those select like missions. So if you extrapolate and you go, okay, well maybe it's like 15, 20 hours per act, maybe you get to like 60, 70 hours.
Yeah, that's probably like, if you're only doing like the main quest line, I could see it being like a 60-hour game if you only do the main quest. If you throw in some side quests and you're putting to like 70 hours. If you're doing miscellaneous quests, you're going like 75 hours. If you're doing like, I don't know if it's gonna have collectibles, but if you're like exploring a little bit more extensively, pushing 80. Some people might say that's bad. Some people say like, oh, it got to be 100 hours to make it warranted and things like that. It's like, a good game's a good game. If the game is good, if I feel like it's worth the value, Again, it's people who have a monetary radar for like, and I won't say radar, but barometer for like, a game's length, and that barometer is $1 per hour. So if it's $70 video game, then I want I want 70 hours out of that game.
Again, all that's just speculation. And to be clear, I'm good with whatever they're doing. They were able to keep the pacing up pretty good while we were playing. Granted, we were playing selected little chunks of the game, but if they can keep this rhythm and pace up throughout 40, 50, 60 hours, I will be a very, very happy camper, especially when you factor this in. The game is listed on Steam for sale for only $60. This isn't one of those like $70 quadruple A games. Like, they're releasing it for $60, which for EA to do is insane. It's already Steam Deck verified. I think it was a full 2 months ahead of launch that they first announced it was Steam.
Again, what I said before, if doing the main quest only is 50 to 60 hours, and you have that thought process of $1 per hour, that lines up with that. As for like, it is surprising that EA is willing to have this AAA game, because it is AAA game, be $10 less than the new. Remember, this is the new standard for game prices being $60. The old standard was 60, so this game is at the old standard. EA could have been spoken to by the marketing team, like, hey, we got a better chance of selling this game if it's cheaper. People will see that, that price. It's kind of the same thing with Ubisoft. Ubisoft's greedy as hell, but they sold Mirage at like 40 or $50 instead of $70. It could be easy made it $70, and people would have bought it and just been like, oh, this game is too short for this price, whatever. But being $40, $50 for Mirage, people were more interested in being like, okay, I can buy that because look at that price.
Steam Deck verified, which is insane as well. And they've also clarified that it's not going to require the EA launcher to play, which is also a very nice win. If you buy it on Steam, you can just hit play and play it. Like, it's funny that is like a W, but that was not a given for a lot of other EA games for a very long time. And now they're lifting that requirement, which is, in my opinion, a very good thing to see. Now, in some of the other missions that we got to play, we reset with a new playable character because they loaded us to a separate area of the game later on, so it didn't carry over our created character. That's why you'll be seeing somebody else instead of the character that I chose. As I said at the top, I also replayed certain areas multiple times, which allowed me to test out different builds, different archetypes and classes, and so you'll also see different characters in those instances. We got the chance to see a lot of dialogue play out between the party members. There was even the chance to have a little bit of romantic flirting with different characters. There was even the chance to talk with characters like Harding and even flirt it up a little bit if you are somebody that likes to play these games and check out the romance options and stuff. It seems like there's a lot here and a lot of depth. If you're wondering why Harding is all bruised up in this shot, it's actually because in the first mission of the game, I made a choice to basically have her help me, and it put her into harm's way. She got injured as a result in a cutscene that followed that, and as a result, for the rest of like the first chunk of Act 1, she was all bruised up and messed up, even with these like scars and things and the wounds and cuts slowly healing over time. The first mission I did after the prologue, she was extremely battered and bruised up, bruises everywhere. And then this sequence is a little bit later, maybe like a quarter of the way through Act 1, based on what I was told, and she's actually recovering better. She's starting to heal up, but she's still obviously injured. And it's once again like a cool visual in-game representation of one of your...
I think it would be like, it's just my opinion. Some people probably won't like this. I think it'd be cool if that actually had gameplay implications. Like if she goes through that and she's battered and bruised, if you take her on a mission that she has like a limited health pool, like instead of being 100 health, she's at 60 health. Instead of having like, I don't know how this game works when it comes to like mana and things like that, because we have like a game. So like, let's say she has less stamina, like there's an actual implication to her being hurt that affects actual gameplay of if you use her in a mission, that injury affects her in mission. I think it'd be cool. A lot of people probably be like, fuck no, I don't want my missions being impacted, by that. I'd rather just keep it being a cosmetic thing.
Your choices, and she'll even have dialogue that reflects it. People asking her if she's doing okay, she looks pretty rough and things like that. Whereas if I chose a different way, a different character would be in this spot and would have the damage done to them as well. I love this kind of thing, and there's many, many examples of that in Dragon Age, the Veilguard, that I saw, some that I can talk about like this and others that I can't. And it gets me very excited to see how this would play out when you're playing the full game, making tons of choices that affect not just one of these characters, but all of your companions. Now, I did try a variety of classes and character builds while I was playing. I also tried different combinations and mixtures of companions to see how they would mix and match together. And I know there's been a lot of like skepticism or cynicism.
It's like an orc. It looks so small now. Like, I know like they're possessed by the freaking blight, and they said before that the blight is like affecting how they look. Damn, like if you compare like the orcs in freaking Dragon Age 1 and 2 to like now, like they just seem so small.
Whatever it is, towards the choice to make it so you can't tactically control companions. But I will say, after playing the game myself, I don't blame them for making that choice whatsoever. Combat is so frenetic, so crazy, hectic, especially when you're dealing with boss fights or fights with many enemies on screen at a time. Things can get really, really crazy really quickly. And being able to just quickly use like shortcuts to activate abilities for your party members, and then being able to swap those out for different abilities or different party members that can do other things faster or that complement this skill of yours better. It's really, really fluid, and I was impressed at just how quickly I was able to get used to it. If I had to compare it to something, I would say that it plays similarly to like God of War 2018 mixed with Assassin's Creed Odyssey with the quick ability wheel. It's an interesting amalgamation, but it does also make sense when you consider when this game was being created and built out, most likely around that 2018 period, where two of the biggest games of that year that were both nominated for Game of the Year were Assassin's Creed Odyssey and God of War 2018. And as a result, they probably took a few nods and ideas from that, things that they thought were working and that players seemed to connect with and really like. And I like both of those games, and I think they play really well, and I'm glad to say that I enjoyed the combat here. The early game combat they showed in the prologue in the first 45 minutes or so of the game was certainly slow and looked like a real trudge in comparison to what you might expect from a deep, expansive RPG. But even halfway through Act 1, I was impressed with just how varied character builds could be. As I said earlier,
I think you can see like the growth in that. Like at the beginning of the game, it needs to take longer to kill, and your character is a little slower because it's the beginning of the game. You're not maxed out on your character. Like you don't have crazy strong weapons yet. It makes sense for you to be in slower combat, whereas you mid game and late game, you'd be a lot quicker because you have all these builds, your character's leveled up. You know, so it just makes logical sense.
Status effects that would whittle down the damage over time, making big crowds of enemies easier to control. And it was pretty cool to see that only halfway through Act 1, presumably only maybe 10 hours into the game, people's playstyles were already varied that much just based on experimentation. Imagine what this is going to be like when people actually get their hands on it and start looking for all the super special unique items that can break builds this way or that way. It's going to be crazy. Speaking of crazy, the game is graphically stunning, and I don't need to tell you that. I know some people don't like the subsurface scattering that they use for some character faces and stuff. I personally think the game looks ridiculously good, and I am thoroughly impressed every time I see like the hair sim or just the way that they're able to render hair and hair physics. Coming off of Dragon Age Inquisition, where one of the most famous and common complaints about that game was how bad the hair sim was and how bad hair looked in that game, to see them come here and pull a total 180 where the hair is ridiculously impressive is just awesome to see. I mean, it really is cool, and it's a huge improvement over pretty much any other open world adventure game I can think of in recent memory. They really cranked the dials when it came to the hair fidelity, and then the fidelity of skin, subsurface scattering. Everything they're doing here is crazy. And this was one of the points of concern for a lot of us, which was that this is running on the same engine as Mass Effect Andromeda, as Anthem. This is an engine that has had lots of problems with games of this type, at least in years past. However, it really seems like whatever issues they had with Andromeda or with Anthem, they fixed or were able to overcome over the last however many years. And I got to hand it to them. I thought they would just throw in the towel and be like, okay, this engine's not working for us. Let's just try something different. But no, they've come out and figured it out. And, you know, maybe they made some compromises. They made the levels more linear, and that made it easier to manage. I'm not really sure what went into these design changes. Maybe there's more complexity to it.
Yeah, I mean, I could see where he's going with that one, because generally when it comes to like engines, a lot of times companies just don't know how to use an engine. So, you know, especially if you didn't want it to begin with, because when it comes to like, say, like the Frostbite engine, for example, EA kind of forced all their studios to use it. So it was like, all right, we're forced to use this engine that's designed for an FPS game. Let's use it on our RPG or our sports game. It's like, you know, you might not like the engine. It might not have like a lot of ease of use, because like Unreal Engine has a lot of ease of use. I don't know. I don't remember if the Cry engine was like easy to use, but it's like very, very like CPU heavy. It's very, very strong. Like it's a very, very, very good engine, but it's also like, you know, it's powerful. But Unreal is like an easier engine to use. It's easier to like manipulate. It's easier to like to get it to perform the way you want it to perform when you design for games on lower spec consoles and lower spec, you know, PCs. Where it's like CryEngine tends to like try to push the boundary of what, you know, a game can do. So when it comes to like this game in particular, and you know them fine tuning the engine and not changing the engine, you can see it as just, you know, like, you know, them just getting used to the engine. Like they've now had, you know, 10 years to get used to this engine and figure out how to manipulate it in the way that they wanted it to work. And you could say like maybe that's why they downsized the game to being more open linear than open world. Or that's just a design choice in general. It has nothing to do with any engine at all.
But what I know is that what I played was graphically really impressive and polished out the ever-living ass. I've participated in a number of preview events for games, including ones that were roughly 2 months before launch. And in almost all of them, the games run quite rough. There are bugs, there might be frame dips, this or that, but it's understood that this is an in-progress build. It's in development. What we're playing is probably even a few months older than the actual event because they had to prepare it. And so you usually can't take away a whole lot from the performance of demos and previews like this at events.
But also point out, you know, he said earlier in the video that they're playing on a very, very powerful PC. He said he doesn't know like the exact specs, but like he can tell that it's a very strong PC. So point this out because I want to just get it out now. When this game fully comes out, if you're running a 2060 or you're running a freaking, I don't know if it's going to be on like a PS4, but like if you're playing PS5 or Xbox Series X or Xbox Series S, you might have issues, you know, and there'll be people who'll be like, oh, you lied. You said the game's polished. I got this bug or that bug. It's like, you know, he told you that the game was running on a very powerful PC. If you're running on lower spec stuff, you might come across more issues because, you know, playing on something that's very powerful. You don't have the CPU for, you don't have the GPU for, you don't have the RAM for, whatever it may be, you don't have enough for. Like this game, most games, I won't say most, but a lot of games struggle on the Series S because it's just such an inferior, you know, platform where it's really hard to get games running good on that because it just doesn't have the specs for it. So, you know, it's not a lie or him being dishonest by him saying that the game's very, very polished. And then like the game comes out and, you know, some people do have issues. I always say this, we all experience games in a different way. You might not never have an issue that I have in a game and vice versa. You might say this happened to me in this game. And I'll be like, that didn't happen to me. You know, like example, like it was Unity. A lot of people talk about Assassin's Creed Unity being a bad game because of its launch. It's not a bad game because it had bugs. You know, if there's certain things make a game good, story, combat, the game design, level design, the writing, the voice acting, like a lot of stuff like that. That's what makes a game good or bad. Bugs and glitches are annoying, and it can hinder you playing the game because if it's so shitty to like run, then you can't really get a chance to see if the game is or isn't good. People had a lot of issues with Unity when it came to its launch. I didn't. I didn't run into any of the common issues Unity had. When I played Unity, it was mostly a fine experience. So I didn't have a lot of those glitches. I didn't have the face glitch. You know, I would have like the usual Assassin's Creed itis moments where it's like, you know, this is every Assassin's Creed game where jumping could be a little janky or climbing could be a little janky. That's just all Assassin's Creed games because of just how the engine runs with parkour system. But for the most part, I didn't run into like a lot of the major bugs people were talking about. So I don't have that experience of Unity being this broken game. My experience with Unity is I enjoyed a lot of Unity. You know, so same thing comes to this. We're all going to experience different things because things happen. You might never experience a bug that I experienced. I might never experience bugs that you experience.
That's usually because the game runs way worse at the events than they will at launch. This game already runs ridiculously well. Granted, we were playing on a high-end PC, but when they say that they have optimized the game and they have focused on polish, and this is not going to be one of those Andromeda situations, I believe them, because I could not tell you the last time I was at a preview event for any game that was 2 months out from launch at the time that I played it, and it ran this well. I had maybe 1 or 2 dips below 60 frames in my entire 7 hours with the game. And even then, it was for like maybe a quarter of a second before it came back and was running back at 60. It was maybe dropping like 3-4 frames when I went into like a new level and the doors open and I walked through. Like very, very inconsequential. I am thoroughly impressed here, and I hope the whole game is this polished and it's not just Act 1.
Arrows won't be infinite.
Good God Almighty, I'll give them this. It is very impressive the work they've done to get this running well. I already thought that the Steam Deck verification 2 months ahead of time was a good sign. I really think they are trying to prove a point that this is not going to be an Andromeda situation again. But speaking of Andromeda, one of the other frustrations was people felt that the writing was not that great in that game. So people have been skeptical of the writing in this game to see whether or not it holds up or is going to be able to hold a candle to what they did in previous Dragon Age games. And what I will say is that while I'm not overly familiar with the lore of Dragon Age or anything like that, I found myself compelled by the stories that they were telling in these isolated missions. I was compelled by some of the choices you had to make, some of which are quite...
My curiosity when it comes to story as a Dragon Age fanboy is the gravity and advancement. Every Dragon Age game progresses the world situation. Again, I said before earlier in the video that there is multiple conflicts going on. There's the Dalish elves who live in cities who want to be treated better. You know, think like civil rights and social justice. There's a civil war going on involving the Mages and Templars. You have the Blight in the first game. There's ensuing wars going on where other nations want to go to war with other nations. Like there's a lot going on in Dragon Age, and it's like, and every game progresses it. Every game progresses all those conflicts. And one of the things is the thought process that blights happen every, I don't remember what the time was, but it's not like they're not a frequent thing. It's like, I think 100 years for like every blight, maybe longer than that. This game probably doesn't take place, you know, other than like maybe like 10 years after Inquisition, and there's another blight happening. So it's like, you know, is the conflict of the Mage and Templar war and the also the conflict between other nations, is that affecting how frequently a blight can happen? You know, so it's like you want to see progression of the story, you want to see progression of where, because again, there's a game that has world states that follow the previous game where you load in your own playthroughs to what you did. So you want to see that continuation. You want to see that continuity. You don't want the game to be too, you know, off topic. You know what I mean?
Consequential, which we'll talk about in just a second. But all told, I was captivated. I thought the performances of pretty much the entire cast were compelling, and other than 1 or maybe 2 characters, I don't think that there's a single bad egg in this basket. The one character I didn't really connect with was this companion, Balara.
I was going to say it. I was going to take a wild guess and say Balara is going to be one of those characters that people are going to have a hard time liking. And this isn't like an uncommon thing. Every Bioware game has 1 or 2 characters people tend to not like. I'm predicting Balara. I was going to say before I was going to like pause, but I don't hear him say it. I was going to say Balara. And Andromeda, it was Phoebe. And Dragon Age 2, people didn't like Aveline all that much. Sebastian was another one people tend to not like. The ladies love Sebastian though, but a lot of dudes thought he was freaking annoying and whiny. In Dragon Age 1, I don't remember who's people like a little bit out on Dragon Age 1 into character. People were a little iffy on Anders at first. Nathaniel, people were a little iffy on. Inquisition, people didn't like Vivian. Blackwall was hit or miss. Cassandra was also hit or miss. You either love Cassandra or you hated Cassandra. It was no in betweens. Mass Effect 2, some people didn't like Jack, which is weird because, you know, she's a very popular character now. Back then, there were people who didn't like her. People didn't like Miranda. I had a friend who hated Miranda. Jacob is even I hate Jacob. He's a meme in the community on the character people don't like. Mass Effect 1, I don't think there's any character in Mass Effect 1 people didn't like. But yeah, there's always a character people don't like, and that's, to me, that's good writing. You shouldn't like every single character in the game. That's not realistic. That's not how life works. You don't interact with everyone in your life and like them. There's some people you don't like. It's just, to me, that's just realistic, and I like that. I think that's good writing when you have a game where there's characters that people just won't like.
You find her like super early in the game and talk with her. She just comes off as like very, I'm so quirky, like, oh my god, I'm so quirky. You know, it's
I was gonna say that too. I was gonna say I can see her not being liked because she's gonna have that's what thing of Sarah. Sarah in Inquisition was another character who people were kind of iffy on because she was like very goofy. She was like Phoebe in Andromeda. She was very goofy. She was very bubbly. She was very, you know, unserious and sarcastic. And like, if you don't like that kind of character, you hate that character every time you see it. And I could see Bellar being another Sarah.
Kind of energy that's just like desperate for attention that I don't connect with. I'm sorry. I'm too old and I just don't have whatever it takes to put up with it. And so what I took away from her is like, okay, she's like kind of annoying, a little much for me. I'm sure other people might find her charming or silly or funny.
Because again, even though, like I said, people didn't like Sarah, there's people who love Sarah. People who thought she was freaking funny and thought she was, you know, a lovable goofball. I think she's okay. I don't think Sarah's like this insanely shit character. But again, to me, like I said, it's good writing to have these characters who personalities are so strong. You yourself as a player have an opinion of them in a way that's, you know, kind of like fair. It's like he's being fair when he talks about Dr. Ballari. He's not saying she's a bad character. He's saying, you know, for his personality type and her personality type, they just don't mix.
But for me, I found myself actively not taking her to do stuff because I just kind of annoying to me. But that's the nice thing about having a lot of companions, is that you can choose to not take some that you don't connect with, and that's okay. I'm going to offend some people here. I don't really like Will in Baldur's Gate 3. I find him just kind of dry and uninteresting. I know people are going to be upset at me, but
that's kind of the take you have about Jacob in Mass Effect 2. Jacob's kind of boring. He's like, he's a boring soldier who just toes the line. Like he doesn't really bring any conflict to you when it comes to like conversation. Like there's nothing when it comes to like Jacob in Mass Effect 2 where you're like, he's compelling. You know, when it comes to like talking to Miranda will fight back against you. And that kind of like makes you like her a little bit more because you're like, okay, she's compelling. She's not just this one kind of character who's just going to like fall in line and do whatever you say and you know, things like that. Like there's something there. There's development to her character. Same comes like Jack. But like Jacob is just like he's a board of dialogue who just stays the same way from beginning of end to the game, who has like a sad boy moment when it comes to his dad, but it's kind of just like still exactly the same kind of character though. Like he doesn't really change his emotions at all. Like Miranda changes. Like Miranda goes from this Cerberus bitch to being a very likable character by the time you get to Mass Effect 3. You know, and she's also way more like open. Like she's very close off and just doesn't like anybody and has massive trust issues. But by Mass Effect 3, she's way more, you know, interactive with the team.
Just choose not to play with him when I go through Baldur's Gate 3 runs. Like I'll take somebody else, you know, I'll take some Shadowheart over here. Maybe I'll take some.
I tend to not take Gale. Like when it comes to me in Baldur's Gate 3, I do tend to ignore Will and I do tend to ignore Gale. Yeah, I tend to only bring like Harlack and freaking Shadowheart. And you know, but I tend to always ignore Gale. I tend to always ignore Will. I don't think they're bad characters, just I don't have fun with their personality type.
Gale, you know, have a little bit of this, have a little bit of that. That's the great thing about games with lots of companions, is that if you don't connect with somebody, you can choose somebody else. Okay, so it's not like Ballara being kind of annoying to me ruins the game, just to be perfectly clear, because I know some people are going to be like, oh god, he doesn't like this companion, therefore the game's bad. No, not at all. The fact that they have variety, that's the spice of life. I'm okay with that. Just because I didn't connect with her or find her interesting does not mean other people will have the same reaction. Having said all of that, it is hard to gauge the quality of the main story given the small selection of gameplay that we got to experience. But what I will say is they do not shy away from big set pieces, big encounters, story beats, or major moments of consequence with
It's Nev with prosthetic leg.
From your
You just noticed that, and Nev
that could have
has
a
a
major
prosthetic
impact
leg.
on thousands and thousands of people. You can straight up ruin entire cities based on your choices, and I love it. I can't describe specifics of some of the most impactful choices that were here, but to put it simply, there are multiple times in the game, from what I understand, just with
I'm trying to remember. There was a Dragon Age game. They don't have consequences. I forgot which one it was though. I'm thinking of like you basically chose whether or not a city got overrun. It's like shit. But hey, but in your hair, like that was the choice to make. That was a choice that was like the better choice to make. But you know, I don't know, like The Witcher. The Witcher was always a game where there's always a consequence, even to good choices, and that's great game design. But so even where there's a good choice, there's still consequence. And what he's going to refer to, I feel like the choice that you made might have been the better choice to make, and no matter what you did, there's gonna be consequence. And I just think that's just very good game design.
in Act 1, where you will be prompted to make choices that will have long-lasting effects for the rest of the game, where you choose to go this route basically, and your run-through of the game as a result will be fundamentally different from other people that chose the opposite choice.
And I'd imagine when it comes to like NPCs, they all react to you differently. Because again, this is Bioware game, and Bioware is very big on that, where NPCs react to you differently. There might be NPCs who just will not fuck with you at all because of the choice you made, even if you feel like it was a good choice to make.
There are multiple instances of this. The devs talked about it, how they really wanted to empower players to make choices that were consequential and to show them that those choices have an impact. Remember I said earlier that I basically played through my lunch break and wanted to test different outcomes by choosing different choices, going through and having this dialogue choice versus this one and choosing to go that route versus this route. I tested some stuff that I was not allowed to record and I'm not allowed to spoil for you, but what I will say is that there were at least 2 or 3 instances where you can have a totally different outcome that is extremely impactful, not just to you as the player, but to your companions and to people your companions know, to their quest lines. It can be potentially even like literally earth shaking based on your choices here. And it is exactly what I want to see out of an RPG, for me to be able to make choices that have an impact that's not just told to me in like a different splash screen at the ending credits, but something that actually affects my gameplay, affects the levels that I'll be going through, the NPCs I'm interacting with. That's what I want to see. And they've pulled it off here. And it really makes me excited to see what the entire game is going to present when you have 3 acts of those types of decisions, not just a couple quest lines like we had. Now, as for other variations in terms of gameplay between players, there's the narrative side of things and then there's the gameplay side of things. I've already alluded to the different classes and stuff that you're able to pick from. I was able, thankfully, to test out everything from rogue gameplay to, as you can see here, magic-based combat. And I was suspicious of the magic build at first. I know a lot of people were saying that they didn't really like it at the event. They were like, I'm just not connecting with it. But it seemed as though the pattern was if people tried to play the first few missions with magic, they didn't really like it. Once they got to later missions with the mage, they were able to experiment with much higher level spell combos, with different synergies between your companions and yourself. And those people ended up really liking the combat. Now in this section of gameplay that you see here, I'm actually playing a later section of the game. It's actually like the last mission before the end of Act 1 is my understanding. And this is what they consider to be spoiler-free footage, by the way. So if this is spoiler-free, imagine what the spoiler footage looks like. But we're fighting through waves and waves of enemies as we work our way to an objective that we need to do something that I will be quiet about. But we are fighting and fighting and fighting, and I am actually really impressed with how these different builds can work together. If you choose certain companions, they have synergies with your build or with each other's builds based on the types of damage that they put out. So based on what weapons you have equipped, which abilities you have equipped, what you've upgraded, and how, you might want to take some companions versus others because they'll complement your skills better or worse. It's really, really smoothly implemented, and I found myself actually having a really, really good time. Like I said, I played through this mission that you're seeing here like I think 2.5 times. I got halfway through it before we had to stop for the hard stop. But I played this mission a few times and I was still having fun even after experimenting with different classes and builds. And I really think that this game's combat is just one of those systems that you're gonna have to just try to really get how fluid it comes off. I had a very good time. Granted, I do like
basically stating that like you can't watch a review of this game and get a sense in that way. You're going to want to actually like play it, which at that point I hope there's like a demo. Like with BioWare and where EA is at right now, you want people to play this game. They should put a demo out like a week before the game comes out, 2 weeks before the game comes out. This game needs a demo.
Creed Odyssey's combat. I really like God of War Ragnarok and God of War 2018's combat systems, and this plays roughly similar to those with a little bit more of a hectic tinge to it. The one thing I think that is important to note out is that in the missions we were playing, you do fight through waves and waves of the same class of enemies. They do throw in some bigger brutes, they'll throw in some different high aggression grunt type enemies, then you might fight a big ogre, or there might be a boss fight at the end of it. It's pretty similar to what, again, you would have seen in other games that use similar combat styles to this, whether that's AC Odyssey or God of War. You fight waves and waves. It's going to come off a little samey after a while, but thankfully the gameplay loop and the combat is engaging enough that I never really found myself bothered by the lack of variety from mission to mission, because going from one mission to the next will introduce more variety, but usually within individual missions, it's pretty samey. But again, this is just video games for you. It's just kind of how that works. So this might not even really be an issue. It might just be something if we're looking to nitpick. That's where we could.
To some degree, every game will get repetitive. Doesn't matter what game you're playing. To some degree, it's going to start hitting a repetition wall.
Find it, but I figured I'd point it out nonetheless. Here's an instance where you can see those synergies, where you can see after I popped one ability from Harding on the right side of this wheel, on the left side, you can see that he has a ability that specifically combos with the ability that Harding just used, and that can also combo with abilities I have, so that you can have pretty much ultimate abilities you're popping off if you do it in a select order and way. And also, to be clear, because I've seen some people bring this up, you do not have to open the wheel every time you use an ability. It's only when you want to open up and pause time, kind of taking a breather, figuring out what you want to do. You can see in this gameplay that I'm actually using the quick activated abilities as I'm fighting through, where I'm pressing right trigger to pull open the ability wheel, and then I'm selecting left, up, right, or down on the D-pad, or XAB to activate my abilities. And so you don't have to pull the wheel up every single time. You can kind of quickly select them and figure out how you want to use them and pop them fast. But okay, at the end of this, what are the takeaways? What's my kind of final opinion? I went into this preview event expecting the game to be kind of I expected it to be a reinvention unnecessarily of a formula people already connected with. I figured it would come off as just a less impressive Witcher or God of War clone or Baldur's Gate, adjacent RPG, but they've actually managed to strike their own tone, their own presentation, and I do think there is a pretty sizable market for something like this. People like RPGs, people like fantasy adventure games, and they like high production values too, and this seems to do all of it pretty well, and they are taking active steps to try and remedy the mistakes of years past. They're releasing this game at a discount for what is considered to be AAA pricing. Nowadays, if they wanted to charge $70, they could do that and get away with it. Nobody would really bat an eye because it's a AAA like main entry game in a big franchise. But in this case, they were just releasing it at $60 on Steam because they want to show you that, like, hey, yeah, we're trying to be pro-consumer. We're trying to give this to you at a fair price. Here you go. They're doing other things like polishing the ever-living crap out of it to show that you can optimize a game and still release it and be profitable if the game is good. And it seems as though the game is, at its core, entertaining, and good. And that's what I'm looking for. I just want another game that I'm going to have fun with, that I can be proud of supporting because it's priced fairly, it's optimized, it's polished. That's what we've all been begging for like a year or two out of these big AAA releases that come out rushed, come out broken, come out lazily thrown together and uninspired. And this seems to be a direct answer to those frustrations. And I'm here for it, frankly. I'm excited to say that I'm excited for Dragon Age the Veilguard, and after playing this game, I feel as though this really could be something special. I'm happy to say I think BioWare might actually be back, and while this game is not going to be for everybody, I'm sure there's going to be some people that don't like the way that they've set up.
It's okay for a game to not be for everybody. You know, a game for everyone is a game for no one. It's okay for a game to not be for you. I have to freaking play it. You know, if you're not into like side scrollers, you don't have to play the side scroller. If you're into a sport game, you don't have to play a sport game. If it's not for you, it's not for you.
Combat or the way that they set up the levels or this or that, I think there are many people who are going to find this game to be something really special and are going to eat it up. And based on my preview, I think I just might be one of those people. I hope the rest of the game holds up to this level. I hope that they're actually able to follow through on this and deliver on the very good impression that this gameplay makes. And I know I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on it when it releases on Halloween of this year. But with all that said, thank you for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me. We'll continue to keep a close eye on Dragon Age the Veilguard as we get closer to launch. You better believe I'm going to be watching it closely and closer than ever, especially now after I tried it and really enjoyed it. But at the end of the day, I think it is safe to be excited. I think it's safe to be intrigued by this. It really does seem as though they have worked their asses off to deliver something that they are really proud of. And after playing it myself, I can see why they are so confident and why they're so proud of it. It's not going to be for everybody, I'm sure, but I have a feeling it's going to be for me. And that makes me excited. Lingering questions I have, just to run through these real quick because I wrote them down and I was like, ooh, I should talk about this. As I said, I don't know how big the game is. I'd like to know that. I don't know if they'll announce that before the game launches. It might not even be that helpful, but it does seem it's big nonetheless. However, I wasn't able to get a clear answer as to exact length. As for whether or not extreme choice variety exists also in later acts, I'm also not sure. A lot of these types of games start off really strong with that type of thing, and then they sort of drop off in later acts while they try to tie up various strands, which is very normal. Even Baldur's Gate to a certain extent had that problem, so if you even call it a problem. So I'd like to know that. I also want to know how viable extreme playthroughs are. Like, can you just play as somebody who is extremely evil? How does that look? How do your companions react to that? I'm curious as to that because we didn't really get the chance to test enough how you could destroy relationships as well as build them up. And there's also been a lot of discussion over the companions and the way that they've set them up here. Basically, companions are designed to have their own little lives and opinions and feelings. They'll interact with other members of your troop, basically, and they'll even like begin romantic relationships with each other if you're not engaging with them yourself, which is kind of interesting. Because when we did a Q&A after we played the game for a bit, somebody asked, hey, can I like sabotage other relationships? Like, say I want to get with this person who's in the party, but this other companion wants to get with them as well. Can I sabotage that relationship? And they were very coy about it, but the devs said, well, there's no like sabotage relationship button, but they will hypothetically, let's just say, come to you for advice. And nobody's saying that you have to give them good advice. And if you give them bad advice and they make a mistake, that relationship probably doesn't work out, which is just kind of cool. The idea that
one of the rare things about BioWare games is inner relationships between your companions that aren't with you. Usually it's all about you, since you're the main character, you can date whoever the fuck you want to date. It's very rare in BioWare games for like the companions themselves to party up, you know, to shack up. In Mass Effect 3, I want to say it was 3, you don't romance Tali, her and Garrus get together. Same thing on vice versa. If you don't romance Garrus, he gets with him and Tali get together. You don't even have like an impact on that. There's like no interaction where it's like you can tell them, hey, you can't do that. But in Mass Effect, if you don't romance Tali or Garrus, they will get together. I don't think of who else. think that was pretty much it. Because Rex gets with freaking the shaman chick, Eve, and she's not a party member, so it doesn't necessarily count. Jacob alludes to like there was like a short fling between him and Miranda that was like more so just her using him than anything else, but it's like it wasn't in game though. It was like just something that he mentions to you, so it doesn't count either. Trying to think. Nothing happens with Liara. Liara kind of is either with Shepard or she's by herself. Ashley, I think she had some flings, but I don't think it was the other crew members. Jack is very open about the fact that she's had a lot of sexual partners, but again, that's something that happens with her and the crew. Mass Effect wise, Dragon Age wise, I don't remember there being anyone who groups up with when it comes to like the crew itself. This would be a little bit different and a new thing for BioWare for the most part. Because there's only like small, hard to remember moments where, you know, a crew member dates another crew member.
There's like romance options with companions, and then they'll even try to have romances between each other, and then you can sabotage those or interact with those. That's the kind of interaction with companions. This feels maybe inappropriate to make that hand gesture, but you get what I mean. You know, there's interactivity with companion. I'm going to move on. And then lastly, I just want to know about console performance. We got to play the game on PC. I don't know how this will run or look on console because it seems like everything we've seen so far is on PC, which is fair because that's where it's going to look the best. But still, I'd like to see if this is going to be running well on like a Series S, or how does it look on the PS5 Pro? Is it going to be receiving some enhancement there? I know it hasn't been announced yet, but maybe it does receive an enhancement. I'd like to know that stuff, and I'm sure we'll find out more about that as we get closer to launch. But with all that said, guys, I'm going to call it there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making my dreams a reality. Let me know what you think of Dragon Age the Veilguard after these previews have dropped, because mine is not the only one going.
Good video. Leave a like. As always, when it comes to like when I do a reaction, the YouTube side, the link to the video will always be the first link in the description box. So Twitch side, we usually will post a link in the chat so you can watch it yourself. Always show the original video love and just watch the reaction of someone. Always watch the original video, even if it's just to like, you know, watch a little bit just so they can get the view time and, you know, the like and the comment, because those interactions matter. But like I said, I cherry picked Luke's video in particular because I felt like he was going to be the most, you know, potentially critical but also fair person, because a lot of other people tend to have like their own biases. Luke tends to be a little more fair, and even when I say that, I'm not saying that I agree with him on everything. A lot of times when it comes to Luke, it's like a 50-50 thing where sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't. That's a natural thing, but there's some people who, you know, they're just a little too much. I'm a BioWare fanboy. I want to watch someone who isn't. He's stated before that he doesn't really know a lot about Dragon Age, so he's not a fanboy of the franchise. So he has a lot more chances of, you know, just being honest about his impression of the game. Whereas a fanboy, someone who's a fan of the game, will gloss over certain negative things because, you know, hey, it doesn't matter to me because I love this particular thing. But yeah, so check that out. Show Luke some love. You know, I know it's funny for someone who's my size to say show someone his size some love. But, you know, do those things.